The vampires cannot be saved. Their fear of the cross is a curse traced back to the price of 30 silver coins. Let's find out how the betrayal of Judas and the blood of Cain forged the monster's eternal damnation.
Welcome to Shadows of Creation, where ancient legends, forgotten horrors, and supernatural wars are reborn. For those who crave the untold side of mythology, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tap the bell below.
We begin our investigation not in a misty graveyard, but within the heavy, cold stone walls of ancient cathedrals and within the fragile pages of Scripture. We are investigating a fundamental paradox, a theological nightmare that haunted Christianity for over 1,000 years. The paradox is simple. How can the vampire exist in a universe governed by a single, all-powerful God? The Church fought a continuous battle for centuries against the restless dead, the European Vukodlak, the Slavic Strigoi, the vampire. These creatures, emerging from deep pre-Christian pagan folklore, represented pure chaotic survival beyond the grave. They were an insult to the core Christian promise: the dead shall sleep until the final resurrection. A spontaneous, self-motivated rising of the dead was proof of a fractured spiritual contract. The Church could not simply dismiss these monsters. The peasant fear was too real, too visceral, and too often backed by the discovery of suspicious, undecayed corpses. The solution was not to deny the monster, but to reclassify it. The vampire could not be a simple ghost or a pagan deity. It had to be a sinner, a man or woman so utterly corrupted by a theological crime that their very existence became a living, unholy punishment. The vampire's immortality was rebranded not as a gift of darkness, but as a curse of eternal exile, a punishment so profound that it denied the monster the release of death and the possibility of divine grace. This theological necessity gave birth to the Abrahamic vampire origin myth. To explain the ultimate horror, the creature that drinks the sacred essence of life and shuns the holy cross, the Church and subsequent folk storytellers were forced to reach for the deepest archetypes of sin. They needed figures whose crimes were so cosmic, so complete, that their stain on the human lineage could explain the vampire's entire existence. They needed a source for the vampire's original unforgivable sin. They needed the betrayer and the first murderer. The theological infrastructure of the monotheistic vampire is built upon two pillars of absolute seminal wickedness: Cain, the murderer who shed the world's first blood upon the earth, and Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed the Christ and sealed his own damnation. Our task is to explore how the folklore and the subsequent literary imagination took these two figures of absolute heresy and transmuted their curses into the fangs, the exile, and the bloodlust of the undead. The theological root of the vampire myth, in its oldest and most widely adopted Christian apocrypha, traces the line of blood back to the book of Genesis and the world's very first crime, fratricide. We encounter Cain, the firstborn son of Adam and Eve. The narrative of his crime is simple, swift, and devastating. Cain works the soil, while his younger brother Abel shepherds. When God favors Abel's offering over Cain's, Cain, driven by overwhelming jealousy, lures his brother into the field and kills him. The act is the primordial breach of human society. The horror that follows is the source of the vampire's curse. When God confronts Cain, he asks, "Where is Abel thy brother?" Cain's infamous reply, "Am I my brother's keeper?" is not just a lie, it is a profound rejection of all human and divine responsibility. God's response defines the vampire's exile. God curses Cain. "The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground, and now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand." The key phrase is not the punishment itself, but the nature of the crime: blood shed upon the earth. In the ancient spiritual understanding of the cosmos, blood was the ultimate carrier of the soul and the essence of life. When Cain spilled his brother's blood onto the soil, he polluted the very ground of existence. The earth, Mother Earth, the Gaia of other myths, was defiled. The folkloric leap that creates the vampire is simple but potent. The creature of the night, driven to consume the very life essence of others, is the eternal punishment for the original act of bloodshed. The vampire is a creature who is forever seeking the life force he destroyed, forever reenacting the primal violence. Cain, the first shedder of blood, is cursed to spawn a lineage that is eternally compelled to drink the blood that was first spilled. The curse manifests as two primary physical and spiritual afflictions that perfectly map onto the vampire's traits. First, eternal exile and the mark. God declares Cain a fugitive and a wanderer upon the earth. This defines the vampire as the perpetual wanderer, the one who can never settle, who is forever separated from the soil that should nourish him. Furthermore, God places a mark upon Cain, not as a sign of condemnation, but as a mark of protection, ensuring that no one who finds him can kill him immediately. This mark is the ultimate source of the vampire's immortality. The curse is that he cannot die, forced to wander through time, forever viewing the consequences of his original crime. Second, the inability to use the earth. The ground refused to yield its strength to Cain. The spiritual successor, the vampire, is similarly alienated from the soil. This explains the folklore that the aristocratic count must sleep in his native earth, a symbol of the land's reluctance to either reject him entirely or sustain him naturally. He is forever drawing sustenance from the very ground he cursed with blood. This narrative of Cain was expanded significantly in non-canonical and secondary texts. The Book of Enoch, influential in many early Christian heresies and Gnostic sects, detailed the lineage of the giants and demons that sprung from Cain's descendants. In the deeper, darker folklore that circulated in the early Middle Ages, Cain became the progenitor of monsters, the father of all aberrant nocturnal creatures, including the early ghouls and lamias that would eventually coalesce into the vampire figure. His crime was so singular that it poisoned the human stream at its source. While Cain provided the blood and immortality for the curse, the vampire required an explanation for its absolute separation from God and its specific vulnerability to Christian symbols. This second pillar of sin is found in the New Testament and the ultimate crime of betrayal. We encounter Judas Iscariot, the trusted disciple who, for the paltry sum of 30 pieces of silver, betrayed Jesus Christ to the Roman authorities. His crime is not fratricide, it is the ultimate act of spiritual treason. He sold the sacred blood of God for the price of a slave. The folkloric argument that links Judas to the vampire centers on the cost of redemption. The vampire who rejects the cross and holy water is a creature who has already committed the ultimate rejection of grace. Judas, by committing the ultimate betrayal, seals his own fate, positioning him as the perfect spiritual ancestor for the damned creature. The curse of Judas manifests in three key ways that define the vampire. First, the price of blood. The 30 pieces of silver, the price of the betrayal, represent the financial material transaction of a spiritual crime. In some folklore, particularly those stories concerning the vampire's aversion to gold or silver coins, the curse manifests as a desire for the worthless material wealth that led to his damnation. More powerfully, it explains the vampire's eternal exile from redemption. His soul was sold, and the price paid was insufficient. Second, the death and decomposition. The fate of Judas, as described in Scripture and later Apocrypha, is violent and gruesome. He dies either by hanging himself or, in the Acts of the Apostles, by falling headlong, resulting in his body swelling and bursting open, with all his bowels gushing out. This grotesque, sudden and messy decomposition perfectly mirrored the physical description of the Slavic peasant vampire, the vukodlak, who was often exhumed in a bloated state, full of blood and prone to bursting when staked. The body of Judas became the theological template for the unnatural, grotesque death of the undead. The vampire's bloated appearance was seen as the literal spiritual disease of the betrayer. Third, the rejection of the sacred. The most defining feature of the monster, its inability to cross running water, a symbol of baptism, its aversion to the cross, and its burning upon contact with holy water, is explained by Judas's state of absolute preordained damnation. Judas is a soul permanently exiled from the covenant of grace, making his spiritual successor, the vampire, a creature who cannot tolerate anything associated with the sacred body or sacrifice of Christ. The betrayal of Judas provided the crucial element that Cain lacked, the explicit theological damnation that justified the vampire's unique spiritual weaknesses. The modern vampire, as it emerged from the Gothic literature of the 19th century, from Polidori's Lord Ruthven to Stoker's Dracula, is not merely descended from these two sinners. It is a synthesis of their paradoxes, a creature defined by their contradictory yet complementary curses. The Cain archetype gives the vampire its immortality and exile. He is the tortured, wandering soul, eternally preserved by a divine mark that prevents true death. He is the existential hero of modern vampire fiction, forever burdened by the ancient crime. This explains the philosophical, brooding vampire who questions his existence and longs for the peace he can never achieve. The Judas archetype gives the vampire its damnation and aversion. He is the soulless, grotesque ghoul, forever alienated from humanity, whose fate is marked by a grotesque body and an absolute inability to enter holy spaces. This explains the primal, terrifying monster who is driven by unthinking malice and must be defeated by religious symbols. The vampire is the ultimate Abrahamic monster because it embodies the greatest paradox of Christian sin, the sin of the body, shedding blood defiling the temple, and the sin of the spirit, rejecting salvation, betraying God. The physical body is cursed to bloat like Judas, but the eternal soul is cursed to wander like Cain. The folkloric connection to these two figures provided the necessary spiritual context that allowed the vampire to survive the transition from peasant superstition to high literature. The storytellers and the priests needed a source for the darkness, and they found it in the two men who committed the ultimate foundational crimes against man and against God. The true horror of the blood drinker is that he is the living testament to the two most unforgivable acts in the history of the faith: